Hi, I want to make a video on this idea of circumstance again, and like always, I'm mentioning it from a different point of view, and this should be a very short video, I swear. It comes down to the circumstances. It comes down to the I've mentioned this before in passing, but getting angry at something, reacting to something. A reaction is part of the circumstance. Things are going to happen a certain way, not just because it's deterministic, but it's part of the circumstance of imposition. And the imposition is what causes the circumstance, not just the imposition of other people on you and everyone else, not just your circumstance and you and everyone else, but everyone else's circumstance and all these pieces moving together. But life and existences and the barriers and everything moving and doing things and letting its vibration, it's inaction. It's action of doing something else. It's inaction being the action that causes something else to happen. It not existing, but that causing something else to happen. So, like I mentioned before, the baby thing, the non-existent babies, not existing, they weren't going to exist to begin with, but that doesn't mean that the action of their existence happening an opposite way couldn't have had it, doesn't have its effect. Because it didn't happen, hypothetically speaking, doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened. It could have, I guess. It's going to happen a certain way, but knowing from our point of view it could have happened, and knowing that it couldn't have happened only comes from the fact of looking back, but looking forward, you know that it can happen. It's the illusion of choice thing, basically, like I'm mentioning again, where we think, the circumstances of our existence, and the deterministic thing, where all this stuff has an effect on us, and there's only so much we can do. We have an effect on everyone has an effect on everyone. Everything has an effect on everything. Life has an imposition on us. Things are going to happen a certain way. The non-existent babies had an effect because something was going to happen anyway. And since they didn't happen, doesn't mean that the thing that already happened was not something that was going to happen, or was a choice that could have been open to another possibility. It was open, it just didn't know until it happened. It didn't happen yet until it happened, and it was going to happen a certain way. It just couldn't have gone either way until it happened. And you can only apply that to the past. So regardless of that, it's reacting to circumstances, getting angry, getting your psychology all worked up over a circumstance. I'm mad at something now because this happened. But then again, why be mad at something? Then obviously you're being mad as a circumstance, and it's part of the circumstance of someone else being a victim of the circumstance. Like I mentioned before, getting stuck in a line, or you say getting stuck in traffic. You're getting pissed off at the person, let alone getting pissed off at the person in front of you, getting pissed off at the person, at the front, but let alone getting pissed off at the person right in front of you. You're pissed off at the person in front of you, say in a traffic jam or whatever, because it's a nice way of understanding dissociation between a human being and another human being. You get pissed off at the person directly in front of you, and they end up suffering the consequences. In many cases, you make the person that's delivering the message feel the wrath, as opposed to the person that should be receiving the message that imposed their circumstance on you. Therefore, you react in a certain way. In many cases, understanding that you shouldn't get mad in many circumstances, and controlling yourself and understanding the right place and the right time for certain reactions and certain events is what you should ultimately learn from a lesson like this, as opposed to anything else. But obviously, it's getting mad. It can be detrimental, or it can be positive, or reacting a certain way more aggressively can be. It's about understanding reaction and how to react in a certain way depending on the circumstance. Like saying, I can never get mad because their circumstance is against their will and I can't do anything about it. What you have to understand is like anything else, their circumstance could have been out of anger, or it could have been out of some negative circumstance of blackmail, or whatever it may be. Any forced circumstance where you're just kind of forced based on the circumstance, or things just happen a certain way and there's nothing you could do about it. Because they're forced, everything's forced once you understand once it happened, it was going to happen a certain way, therefore it is forced. Because it was going to happen a certain way and the circumstances caused it to happen. It doesn't matter if you thought about, okay, I wasn't forced to leave, but because I thought about it, obviously I wasn't forced, but you were forced because once it happened, you were forced into that existence, and that line, that rigid line of existence was already going to happen. It was forced by the very nature of existence. And I guess you can look at it from whatever point of view you want, but it was going to happen anyway. And the thought you're having is what's going to happen anyway, regardless as well. So it doesn't matter how you look at it, it's going to happen a certain way. But unlike anything else, it's about understanding and using these understandings of reality to change the circumstance. And saying you can't change the circumstances ridiculous because the circumstance hasn't happened yet. It's about understanding that you can do something, and fight the fight even though you may lose, fight the winning the good fight, for the hopes that you at least know you tried to win, and the possibility was always there as opposed to just giving up, like reading the crystal ball or whatever it was, whatever example I've used before. At least fight the fight to see if you can do something. Make the value judgments, the weight, and see what's the best outcome for the specific circumstance or fight you're trying to fight for, the specific circumstance you're trying to fight for. Otherwise, you're just going to be sitting there doing frivolous and nothing nonsense, doing nothing, having no function or purpose other than sitting there and being more than an obstruction than anything else. So it's better to be useful than useless, unless you're being a detriment. But then again, we're all being a detriment to a certain extent. It's always about how useful you are in this world as opposed to how useless. Let's see how useful you can be as opposed to your default uselessness that you've been having, and you're only useful if you're not as useless as you were before. So yeah, I mean, that's it. But obviously, learning a lesson, understand that you can change it, and you can understand it hasn't happened until it has happened, and whatever decisions you make and lessons you learn could be applied, and you can make that as part of the future. And obviously, to a certain extent, it's beyond your control, but you're living the existence of the control you have. To a certain extent, you can take that as a lesson. Hopefully, things work out a certain way. You're a piece moving inside the piece, and you don't know what's going to happen inside unless you're outside, and you can have no effect on the inside of the crystal ball or whatever it is having an effect. But obviously, it's going to have an effect. It doesn't matter if you have control over it, but the thing that you do and the lessons you learn can have an effect on the future because they're going to be the way things happen and end up occurring. It's something you have that things are going to happen a certain way. They haven't happened until they happen. Therefore, whatever lesson you've learned, make the most of the lesson and make sure you're doing the best you can to make the fight worth fighting. And it all comes down to me making the sentence and you learning from it and you reacting a certain way, and hopefully it rings a bell or something in your head. And another thing, getting mad at the circumstance, and it's just about knowing how to react to a certain circumstance and understanding the implications, wisdom, learning from your mistakes, understanding certain things, learning from your mistakes early on, so you can make sure that you can use that small mistake to make sure you can prevent bigger mistakes from happening later on. So it's best to learn the mistake early on or not learn the mistake at all. Make sure you can just make it perfection all the way. And like I think I'll mention later on, there's only so much. It's only until failure. Failure is inevitable. It's just a matter of how long until failure or how long until you find that something becomes intolerable. It's only a amount of time. And you can only take so much. You can only do so many good deeds before you want your good end of the deal. Otherwise, what's the point in you doing the good end other than functioning as a useful device on your side? There's only so much you're going to do before you find your selfish needs or whatever before you want to reciprocate something on your side. But I think that's a different video. So yes, you can get mad at something, things you can react a certain way, you can react more aggressively or whatever, but it's just about knowing the right circumstance. And you're not going to always react the right way, but you're going to react as best as you can by learning the circumstance as best as you can. And even if you did learn your lesson, you're not going to always react a certain way. Just sort of like the intention thing. It doesn't matter if your intention was well. If you get mad and you thought that was, or you act aggressively and you thought that was the best way to deal with the problem, it's not always the case, even if you learn the lesson or understood the implications thoroughly enough. Things can always happen a certain way and against your understanding and your empirical knowledge of how specific circumstances have worked in the past. So it doesn't matter how that functions. It's going to happen a certain way, and it's just about knowing the circumstance and learning from your lesson. Letting your wisdom get the best of you is always a good thing to let control you on the circumstance, and that's all it is learning from your mistakes. And it takes more time to learn from your mistakes unless you've learned the mistakes early on. In many cases, that's the best way to learn your mistakes is early on. So that when things are probably more grave in the future, you've already learned from your mistakes by making them during the smaller circumstances where they're more easily corrected for. So it's not about how you can't get mad at a circumstance because a person's a victim of their circumstance. You can still get mad, you can still react a certain way, you can still blame the person in front of you in the traffic jam or in the line or the person delivering the message. It's just saying understand the specific circumstance and implications, doing it a little more intelligently and more accurately as opposed to anything else. So it's something you could still do, and regardless, you're going to react a certain way viscerally anyway, and it's going to happen a certain way regardless. And it's about using that knowledge and using your consciousness to control the thing as best you can. and learning from your mistakes. So that's all I want to mention, and thank you until next time. Bye.